Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast, third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. It's an amazing episode because Kieron Gillen boards the mothership. You know him as the writer behind Rise, the Power of X from Marvel Comics. Now come on board as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Gillen. Thank you so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
So, my pleasure. A big fan of yours. So, I always start off with a question of inspiration. So, inspire your love for comics and who your earliest influences.
Wow. Earliest is really early. You know what I mean? Like, because I'm not a lifer as such. As I came into comics as a kid. I played, in Britain it was harder because you don't really have comic shops where I'm from. And so I drifted out as a teenager, but I was still like comics curious, and I was certainly interested. And I came back hard in my early 20s. So the thing that got me back in terms of reading comics as an adult was just Watchmen. It's one of those bits where it's not complicated. In fact, it's not even interesting or original, but it's like, oh yeah, this is a good comic, isn't it? I sort of read it all when waiting for my American visa. I went to work in America for a year as part of my degree. So I was waiting in Oxford for the American embassy to open, and I just sort of wandered into the Virgin Megastore, as it was known then, and grabbed, Watchmen, I've heard of this. I know I should have read it, because I read everything else around it, but I knew that it just wasn't in Stafford, where I was from. So I got it and had 3 hours to wait. So I read it from cover to cover in the McDonald's on Oxford Street. And that kind of changed everything. So Alan is our first name terms. Yeah. So Alan, Moore is the big founding kind of influenced by comics. I got into comics again more seriously in terms of going every week later via the World Ellis Forum and places like that. So my influences are pretty much that usual group of English and Irish men with names beginning with G and E. Also surnames beginning with G and E.
Yeah. So, coming from British comic books, what is, in your opinion, the primary difference in construction or tone or maybe quality between the British comics and when you found them in the States?
This is a question with a time, you know what I mean? The time period thing matters there. Do you mean on the most broadest level, or do you mean, be more specific just there?
Well,
I could completely do essays on this one. So, we got to be careful.
well, I mean, especially when we're talking about the 80s, when you had in early 90s, Neil Gaiman coming in, Alan Moore, and a bunch of others. I mean, there was a massive influx of British talent that really did change the industry completely during that time period. Um, but why do you think the British invasion made such a big difference in the States? Like, what was that primary crux that made that all possible?
Yeah, it's one of those things I can know it from historical. So specifically that first British invasion, this is basically a group of people from the British Underground and 2000 AD coming in and doing a slightly more a more literary infused and punk rock infused take on the genre. Um, culturally, comics was in a different place in that kind of way. There was a sense that it was part of the broader subculture of pop music and that stuff. And of course, if you're talking about independent American comics, no, there's a very strong tradition of the American independent comics. But if you're talking about for want of a better phrase, the nerdy side, the nerdy side was less in terms of going to gigs and stuff. Whilst in kind of that stuff was all in the warp and weft of things in the UK. I mean, this is the kind of period I was reading about. When I was buying games magazines, video games magazines, and the music press in the late 80s, early 90s, all of them covered comics. So I knew it was kind of part of, oh no, if you're into pop culture generally, you should probably read Watchmen. You probably should read Mouse. You should probably read all these other books. So that's kind of part of that. That's I think the grounding. Now, of course, I think it's just very. I mean, now it's very different. But in terms of when I came in, I got into comics properly in 2000. I got my first work for hire for Games Workshop of all places in 2003, and in 2006 was Phonogram. But I came in. What I like, yeah, it's British, and yes, there's themes, and yes, you've still got that kind of stuff going around. But the American writers are in a very different place because they've all read your Alan Moores and Grant Morrisons and all that stuff. So they've also metabolized it. So also you've got these kind of different people. It's like Ed Brubaker. Ed came through comics generally, then went hard to the indie side, then somehow found himself writing the superhero comics again. And Matt Fraction, Kelly C. DeConnick. These people are I'm trying to say, similar to British writers, like they could have, if they were from Britain in the 80s, they would have been part of that invasion. And I want to have a small pause here and go back. I think that, what I said, that what I gave was the classic take, as in British, basically, British people read books other than comics. That's the kind of way that people would say. And that's just not fair. There's like all manner of those really great, genuinely trippy 1970s American like superhero comic book writers. You know what I mean? Like, so it's unfair to the Americans to flatten it that much, but that's the simple story. Coming back to where I am, like what I think my generation people were, I was probably the first generation internet people. My friends weren't just the people who I knew in the UK. They were that, me and Al in a bar in 2003 happened. So me and Al Ewing, they were people like Matt and Kelly Sue, and we bet on the online. That's where we got our. So my people, I consider my peers, weren't people from my social group at home, which is interesting. You know what I mean? And of course, that's very common now. That's like all the books are dispersed, but that's kind of like where I come from. I feel and it's not. You're talking about like. The kids, there's a word that shows my age. The kids, they're internet native. We're not. We're internet migrants. We're not in the 90s. Okay, I got my first web account in 94. I went hard and kind of discovered this place and learned to love it in that way. So that's kind of how I view where I come from. But at the same time, my work is very British. Like that'd be stupid to deny.
Well, coming into the States, you're currently the writer for. You just finished off the Immortal Xmen, and X-Men, especially in the 80s and early 90s, was one of the premier series in all of comics. I mean, it was at its height in the 80s and 90s. Coming into the country, was there X-Men in Britain at the time, comic books? And how did you feel about a series that you were purchasing when you came to the States?
Yeah, I mean, like, so I want you picking up with the classic Claremont, like 70s, 80s, like period. He's of course such a huge Anglophile, you know what I mean? So like, there's so much British stuff in the X-Men. In some ways, that makes it kind of familiar. And you read the Hellfire Club, like we know that it's riffing on the old Avengers episode. And anyway, that's a side point. Like when I was at Pete Claremont stuff is very much when I was a kid. I remember before I drifted out of comics. So we got the way, for people who don't know, the way comics were mainly presented in the UK. For people who never, if you live near an actual comic shop, and there's some in big cities, you could go and buy the American comics. And occasionally you would get American comics on your newsagents randomly, unreliably, but randomly. But they're also republished in the UK in these little anthologies, because the anthology is the common format of comics in the UK. It still is, like 2000 AD or the Beano. And they took American comics and divided them up into short stories. So like you took like Secret Wars. I mean, Al was talking about this on a podcast recently, but like the British Secret Wars comic was basically an issue of Secret Wars cut into 3, and then was like other stories in the back. Also, when I read Spider-Man in the UK, it was Spider-Man with 2 other stories in as well. But it was like wasn't a whole issue; it was maybe half an issue.
Yeah,
and I found myself. I don't when it was Transformers. I was reading the Transformers, which is partially the American ones, but then you started doing British strips in between the American ones because the Americans they burnt through the material too quickly because British comics are also weekly. So all that's to say is basically what you get is a wider sense of what the medium was. So like you don't really get a sense of continuity as much, because I was reading like, again, this is true, but it's like, period Spider-Man next to 1960s Thor next to 1970s Machine Man. You don't. That's not. I mean, that's all stuff I read, but I didn't know. So you get the iconic shapes of the characters without really knowing how this all ties together, which in some ways serves you quite well. However, actual real X-Men, I mainly, as in period, as opposed to like, because they republished the original X-Men in the UK in these anthologies. So that's the stuff I was really reading. The actual period Claremont stuff is stuff I got in single issues. So, and you never got a gap, so they're always single issues I didn't understand the context of. Like the first one was Goldbug, which is the incredibly weird, like retro Xavier Magneto story involving a lot of Nazis and gold. And it's really adult and petrifying. And I must have read that very young. And I entirely forgot I had read it until I reread the whole run when I was doing prep for Immortal. The first one I actually remember reading properly, and I'm going to get these the wrong way round. Is it 200? I think it's 206 and 208. 208 is a Nimrod battle. Is that right? So it's basically the Hellfire Club and the X-Men versus Nimrod in the park. I think there's 1-2 issues before I'd read but the Nimrod's the one that's sticking in my head because it's that's a throwdown issue. I have no idea the context. Like, I don't know who Rachel is. I don't know why she's been stabbed by Wolverine and she's hiding in the park. I don't know who this enormous pink robot is. Oh, I know he's scary. He's just killed that dude with a headband, you know? And I find myself thinking back. So obviously so much of my runs in there, there's a lot of Hellfire Club. Celine's in there, Shaw's in there, Nimrod's in there. The only thing is Spiral's in there. She's someone I've always wanted to write and never got to. But when I think back to the X-Men, it's how adult it felt. Obviously, I was a kid, but it felt very much like this adult social group, especially in the 80s with like certain artists there made it feel really like you're cool 20-somethings who are having these 20-something careers, and you kind of get that when you reread it. Like I found myself rereading Scott and Madeline's Early Together, and that's like one of the most convincing young adult marriages I've read in comics, and it made me quite angry about them splitting up and stuff. But it's like, this is convincing. I buy this. Sorry, what to cut to the chase? Oh yeah, the other thing, of course, is like you had to just work out the context from reading it. So like, they're in San Francisco. I don't know why, and that's fine though because you try, and so much of that stuff imprints on me. And does that make sense? Like, yeah. So I've got the core X-Men from the 60s, and then the bits and pieces I picked up as a kid in the 80s, and obviously I read some more like later, and I came back in again reading monthly for the first time when Grant took over. So like that was kind of, since I got into circa 2000, that's new Marvel as well. That's kind of like so I came in. In fact, one of the reasons why I started reading comics monthly was to read Morrison's X-Men, new X-Men. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned Al Ewing, because I kind of feel like in the world of Marvel, the word immortal, like Immortal Xmen, is now that it's sort of like back in the 90s, the term, the title, subtitle of animated series like Batman, the Justice League, then became Green Lantern. It means something. And when Al Ewing did Immortal Hulk, now you're doing Immortal X-Men, and now there's Al Ewing doing Immortal Thor again. What does that mean to you to kind of take the reins of that title?
It means a lot, honestly. Like, I actually feel kind of bad about it because I've just had a kid, like when I was taking on Immortal. So like my head was like in a different place. So Immortal X-Men, I hadn't done the math and thought, oh no, that's Al's title. I was just thinking about like what John had done. Like this is obviously building up. This is the Hickmanian book. And this is the figure. When I took over the book, I was more thinking, I'm basically understudying John here. As in, this is clearly the book John would have been writing if he stayed.
Yeah,
like that was my take anyway. So I got so much thinking about John, I hadn't given actually the correct level of thought to taking up Al's name. So I don't, I hope I haven't, because in some ways, like I think Immortal's a very good book that people seem to like, but I don't think it's the same kind of timber of stuff that Al has carved out in terms of these very iconic yet specifically deconstructionary. Immortal Hulk is amazing. Immortal Thor are amazing. He's trying to basically do a fundamental take on the core of the character and find a new way of looking at it and tie all the mythology together. That's not what Immortal X-Men does. Immortal X-Men is specifically a definitive book to try to do about politics of these people in this place now. It's the current affairs book. That's a good way of looking at Immortal X-Men. It's the current affairs book of KCOA. I tried to bring in stuff from other books as well. That kind of like, that issue of 12 when we bring in everything from X-Force with Colossus, issue 11 when we bring Storm and the Iraqi, and so on and so forth. But yeah, like, so I think it slightly annoys me in retrospect. I should have been smarter and realised, but also you've got to forgive yourself. You know what I mean? Your brain's not there in the first year.
Now, the one thing about the X-Men franchise, especially over the last 20-something years, it's very complex. There are a lot of different titles, a lot of different characters. Continuity comes and goes, kind of flips back around sometimes. When you're diving into the Immortal X-Men, what are you deciding to, one, make it honoring what's come before, make it approachable to new readers, and also make it sensible to yourself so you have a handle on this very complex moving wheel?
Yeah, you've just described the problem. Like these are finding how to serve all those masters. With me, is I don't write something I don't care about it. That's kind of my job is finding a way to care about things, and I'm pretty good at like falling in love with things, and that's kind of like you do the deep dive, you think about it. I mean, X-Men are easy. I like the X-Men. I find them really compelling in lots of different ways. And I was a fan of KCOA. That sitting and watching John and the crew launch this thing was a joy. So all that stuff was easy-ish. The hard thing is trying to explain. I mean, like John with Hoxpox had the great advantage of you start from a semi-clear slate. This is we're going to talk about Rise later, but endings are trickier because you've got to bring everything back in again. Like, obviously, starting is hard, and I'm definitely not taking anything away from it. But you can actually go make a best foot forward. And when I was launching Immortal, I was aware, okay, this is the first book of Dawn of Destiny of X. What I wanted to be, if people want to jump aboard, I'm going to try really try hard to explain this all. And I did that, and I do this in Rise as well, which we can talk about in a bit. But like, I desperately want to say everything you need to know. And so that's the one reason that first issue is from the perspective of Mr. Sinister. And Mr. Sinister's got the Moira engine, so he knows everything, which means that I can, with the captions, explain everything to everyone who's reading. Like he knows all the secrets, so he can actually tell people what's going on. And that's, what I mean? Stuff like that. And it's like, and I think, I wouldn't say put up. The problem is when you definitely got that first issue of Immortal, if you read it, it's really text heavy, and that speaks to the problem, as in to explain everything, I have to take the space and slow it down and do quite a texty comic. So yeah, it's a battle, and especially like actually jumping ahead to Rise of the Powers of X, like that whole first issue is explicitly me going, how can I turn explaining what the readers need to know into a story? There's a screenwriter maxim of turn exposition into ammunition, and by which you mean turn like the stuff people need to know into scenes.
Right.
Like, as in, like, make it dramatic. And in my case, it's like, okay, I want to explain the ridiculous timeline complexities we've created. And I'll do that by showing one. So do a cold open and then do the reveal. And if we do the data page correctly, that here's an arrow, and this is where this was, and here's another arrow coming out, I may be able to explain everything people need to know from scratch. And like, how many people are going to be jumping on at the end of the current age? I don't know, but I would like to make it welcoming if they do. That's like, I think back to like me picking up that Nimrod fight. It's like, I didn't know everything that was going on, but I was able to read and puzzle it out and understand by the emotional context. So that's quite important to me as somebody who is late coming to the medium, properly, as I said, I read it as a kid. If someone wanted to pick it up, I want them to pick it up. I don't want to just write for the established fan as much as I'm trying to. There's a lot of, there's Immortal, there's diving through the whole history of X-Men. There's a lot of like the historical aspect really matters to me. But you know what I mean? Like, so balancing them all is tricky. And especially, I do have the fact that I'm not in life, it does make it slightly easier in some ways. Like, I'm not quite as assumed knowledge, maybe.
Right.
But here's the first one at X-Men. This is interesting. I did the same. I tried to do the same thing then. I wrote this. I wrote the first issue of Uncanny X-Men 1 quite cleanly. And the reviews came out, and they were quite confused. Some of them were, and I was, oh, this is interesting, because they were confused. No, everything you need to know was in the story, but what I didn't explain was why they weren't in a mansion in the East Coast of America. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's fun. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to know that, but you do. You know what I mean? Like, if you know about the X-Men to that level, you want to know why they're not there, even though you don't need to know it. Right. So that's not normal exposition. So that taught me a lesson, shall we say?
It kind of reminded me. I don't know if you ever watched the TV show Supernatural.
I have not, no, weirdly, but I've got friends who obviously.
Yeah, it's a great series, especially the first 5 seasons, and then there's the last episode of the 5th season, which was kind of like the wrap up of the series before they just knew they were going to keep going. They had a character writing out the script, and he goes, any monkey with a keyboard can shit out a beginning. It's really hard to do an ending. I thought when you were saying that, I was like, that is supposed to be so true.
It is. Like, it's like, because an opening is a promise. I mean, trust, it's not true. I mean, the openings are like easy, like compelling. Someone walks in the room with a gun and starts shooting people, and now someone's got to go for revenge. Great. Now, how does that happen? Like, the openings are questions, and also they're promises. Like, that's the exciting thing about an opening is it says, I'm going to tell you about this. Trust me, this will make sense in the end, and you're gonna have a good time. And like me trying to do the end of like my side of Rise and Fall is that, as in like John and the whole office has made a bunch of promises. How can we try it off into something that's emotionally and narratively satisfying? And that's no pressure at all there.
Well, you have a character named Exodus in Immortal X-Men number 18. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. He says that a good story is meant to make someone feel something. So
Oh
when
no, that's Mother Righteous says that, but yes, sorry.
yeah. So when the X-Men when a good X-Men story is firing on all cylinders, what are you trying to get your reader to feel?
Honestly, what there's an actual like when I was a critic, I discovered a bit of terminology called the effective fallacy, and it's basically it's a sort of I believe it's a modernist critic thing, and the idea being that just because a work of art moves you does not mean it is good. It believes that basically you got to separate. That could be about the fact you upset over your dad or something, and this story moves you because of this. No, the work of art has to be appreciated outside of that. And I must admit, when I discovered the effective fallacy, I realized, oh no, now I realized what I was doing wrong. I just, by which I mean, I hate this position and I'm against it entirely. You know what I mean? Occasionally, a critical position is just not on your side. No, for me, the only way to actually understand art is, does it move people? If it doesn't move people, it's probably failed, and especially the corner of art I work in, namely fantastical pulp fiction. We're dealing with the raw, red emotions of humanity. So for me, the emotion's always in context. Like in terms of I would like these stories to feel triumph and sadness and loss and oh my god, did that happen just then? You know what I mean? These are big and primal, bright colors, and at the same time, my work's pretty. How to phrase this? Bleak and there's an existential bleakness to what I do. You know what I mean? Like there's there's a playlist for Immortal Xmen, and I describe it as really depressed dinner party music, like glacial. You know what I mean? Like, and there's a lot of that to the Immortal Xmen. These aren't like the kids having a nice time. These are a group of people in a board meeting, and it's life and death, and there's graphs, and oh god, we have to and there's a level of fundamental depression to Immortal Xmen. And that's interesting too. I mean, that's Game of Thrones, that's Secession. These are interesting places. So what an X-Men story can do is whatever the X-Men story needs to do. In terms of themes I like, because it's not like Star Wars, because Star Wars has there's some caveats here. But Star Wars, when I was writing that, it was like playing the blues. I know how a Star Wars story has to go and make you feel. And you can find new spins on it, but you've still got that riff. Whilst X-Men have been more things in different times in different places. But there is some aspects I really kind of respond to. Like there's the heroism of it. Like the something that always appeals to me is the forlorn, desperate heroism. Like there's a school of superhero comics that believe that superheroic fiction is about someone being very powerful and enforcing their will upon the world. Superman is the most powerful character, or whatever like that. And I'm fine with Superman. I'm not stressing that. But my stuff is always the Captain America standing up against Thanos, and it doesn't matter. I'm forlorn bravery, and there's so much about X-Men in me is like they're not going to win. Humans are always going to hate them, but they're going to fight anyway. And that's what that part of me loves in terms of and I expand that bravely. Because and this is about I was raised Catholic. There's a lot of Catholicism in there. I think, as in trying is what matters. And I think there's a lot of that in the X-Men, and also romance. I think I'm really glad that I'm getting back to do more Mystique and Destiny as we go on as well. And monsters, bad guys.
So with Rise of the Power of X, you're basically shutting down the era of Krakoa. If I'm pronouncing that Krakoa. Why was now the right time to end that story? Why do you think it had ended it? Whatever purpose it served in the larger continuity of the X-Men.
It's tricky to say it this way. I think it's almost like specifically now. It's wow, this is a really difficult question. I think it's just Marvel decided to end it now. It's that kind of I don't mean I mean that kind of this feels like 5 years seems about right. Let's do something else a bit different. And that I think it's one of the things that when things have been around for a bit, you get used to it. And that's not people like in superhero comics. So and I also think quite appealing to ending a region. I think we could have maybe had another 6 months, but I wouldn't have gone anything. You know what I mean? I think Fall of X could have done with being a year. But apart from that, I think it's the right time. And it's oh no, we've gone for Act 1, Act 2. I mean, Act 1 is the rise of KCOA. Act 2 is things gets complicated, and then Act 3 is oh no, things are bad, and now. So I'm doing a tipsy head because it's more like a 4-act story. And then what we're doing now is the big fight back at the end of will they win and die and what ends up. You know what I mean? The story is a shape. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of conversations about how John originally planned to do it. And it's like we've had to find our own way for that forest, depending upon larger things. But I always say, like, that kind of the Lucas line about there's bits that rhyme in the prequels. There's beats we do that rhyme with what I think John was planning to do. Especially like for me, it's like, you talk about ending a story. For me, the fact I want to come back and do my side of the story, because the power side of the story is about Dominions, and it's about these times and the concepts of all that kind of big conceptual stuff. And for me to end the Krakoan age, had to have that stuff in. So we've promised this. We've promised the whole story of Nimrod and Omega Sentinel. How can we give an ending like that? And also for me, it's like Moira. We need to end Moira well. All these kind of stuff we start at the beginning, we bring back at the end, and we bring everything we can in together. You know what I mean? That's what I feel like. And just by the process of doing that, you've ended up with some places which feel close to what John's done. Like, I don't want to overpromise it, because I'm really happy one day John says what he's going to do, because that's John's story to say. But like, solely by the questions that John posed at the start of the story, by answering them in some way at the end, I hope there's an aesthetic coherence.
So the thing with Rise of Power of X, not only are you shutting down one era, you do have to launch the new one as well within this series. Now that you got the mutants coming out of KCOA, are we talking about moving them back into the New York superhero world? Do you have a larger picture in mind? They're going, how are you planning to not only end something, but make sure you're setting up a beginning?
I mean, all endings are beginnings, and all beginnings are endings, especially in the eternal second act of the Marvel Universe. This is way out of... if I said anything, because I don't know much, because I'm literally out. I'm leaving Marvel after this, not in a bad way, in that kind of... Actually, no, I've done a few years at Marvel again. I'll go back and do create own work, because that's how my brain works. Because normally if I'm at Marvel, I get ideas that won't work anywhere. Sorry, I get ideas that won't work at Marvel. And then, I want to do these ideas now. And, and when I'm away from somewhere like Marvel, I kind of like look enviously at I quite fancy writing, I don't know, Spider-Man or whatever. I don't want to write Spider-Man. Please, no one quote me on that. But I know roughly where they're sort of like planning to start. And it's like, I think actually, I don't want to say that. It's too early to say that. I hope we set things up well. And it's like, everything you've just said is speculation, by the way, in terms of what they're actually doing. I would like, I don't even want to say, I think people will be surprised by what happens, because I don't want to, because that makes a promise. But like, there's a lot of people making assumptions about what Tom and his team are planning. You know what I mean? Like, they're saying it'll be much more traditional. No, that's something you've made up. Not you, as in the fan base broadly has made up. Yeah. Like, you can see why you presume, oh no, after KCOA it'll be more traditional. And it's like, well, A, what does the end of KCOA mean? And B, are you sure about that? Because like, I just wanted to, like, I don't know, I would leave people to just see what happens, because I'll be interested too. Because I'm thinking about the handoff at the moment, because it's gonna be fun. Like most, I just want to phrase this. It's pleasant. You know what I mean? Like, kind of where I wanted to end it is kind of where they want to start it. Let's leave it like that.
So when you start off, when the Rise of Power of X starts, it starts off 10 years in the future of a particular timeline. So, is it directly the timeline we exist in Marvel right now, whatever, but it's 10 years in the future. So when you're thinking about 10 years in the future, how did you envision what has developed within those 10 years? Did you develop, because you basically have to create non-existent stories for that 10-year gap. So how did you approach that? How did you approach where the characters would be at this point? And were they the characters that you felt were best for the story to get to that point, or were the story characters you wanted to write the most, so you kind of like made them get to that point? You know kind of what I'm saying with that question?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, there's multiple questions in there. Like, okay, the fact this is coming out after issue 1's come out, from this point, I'm going to if I've probably already done spoilers a little bit, but I'm explicitly saying I will be spoiling the first issue when I start talking about this stuff. Like, from now on, right? Everyone listening, please stop, go buy issue 1, or like read it or whatever. Like, specifically, like most of the first issue is set in what is revealed to be not the present time. It's a forked timeline when Dr. Stasis tried to become a Dominion. which is my way of introducing the whole Mr. Sinister Dominion plot, which is a different kettle of fish. But it also does something else in that it's explaining what, despite it being a fork future, it's kind of quite close to, it is close to where we are, and it is basically what happens if Orcus win. So you also get to see Orcus's plot. So that part of me was you're getting to see where Orcus will take us in 10 years as an AI Dominion, because the AI are clearly going to betray the humans, because we know that from Inferno. And this is what it's going to look like. This Earth where, mutants are hunted. Humans are either hunted or traitors. There's some AIs who are kicking against these evil AI masters, like the Tony AI. You know what I mean? So it's basically me telling you where this is heading if the X-Men lose, and also saying, and the X-Men lose. Unless something happens. Except, this is superhero comics. So like, I'm thinking that in those structures, okay, what would Orcus do if, in other words, I'm picking up where Jerry leaves off. As in, what will Orcus do if they take over? And that guides the conversation. Then my second side is the aesthetics of it. Okay, what does a team look like? So I'm thinking about, okay, this is Powers of X sequel. So I want this to feel a bit Powers of X-y. So in the same way, though, there's classic issues where you're going with Apocalypse's team in the far future. This is going to evoke that a little. You know what I mean? Like, all the details are changed, but you're going to go, oh yeah, this is that kind of dark future. So it's familiar but different. And then I start casting and thinking, okay, what happened? Like, okay, well, Tony died and his AI, because I wanted an AI on the team, so that's quite sad. Then you got like, Sync. I wanted Sync quite, especially because I'm casting these people shortly because they aren't my core team. Because at the end I reveal, Xavier and Doug and Rasputin and 2 secret members. But like that's and when Rasputin arrives, Rasputin's also me going, oh, remember, this is a Powers of X book, because that's where Rasputin's from. So like that's kind of how I cast it. Like, let's sell vibe and like what this feels like, because and that 10 years I imagine poetically and broadly as this kind of like desperate battle, because they lose against Orcus shortly and then kind of go into guerrilla warfare. And so how will that go? And okay, Kamala's now an X-Men. I think because this, knowing your dark future self is a classic X-Men beat, let's give Kamala the classic X-Men beat. That kind of casting.
Yeah.
But like, to flip your earlier question, like the whole kind of how much you've got to imaginary stories. Yeah, I've done a bit there. But if you read Sins of Sinister, which we did last year, I decided, because most dark future stories kind of want to skip a few 99, 100. Yeah. But with Sins of Sinister, no, let's go the other way. Let's go beat by beat and say how Sinister took over the world. So that's the other way of doing it. Let's really do the timeline. Let's show you every step of the way in a cut down form. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it does. Another thing that's kind of interesting is the Moira McTaggart timeline thing, where every time she dies, it destroys that universe and resets. Now, for fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who have watched Endgame and Loki, they kind of talk about timeline as something that when it branches off, even when you end it, the other one still kind of continues, but kind of break. Saying they did that whole breakdown of timeline. Now, we were thinking about the timeline, how it works in Rise of Power of X. Even when the timeline technically is destroyed by Moira, are we really talking about a destroyed timeline? Or is it still continuing in one fork? Or is it a completely ended line and reset?
As far as we know, okay, like I say, you always got to say as far as we know, because it's like something could always be revealed. But right. What we map in Rise of the Powers of the X is, the timeline actually ends when Moira dies. But the time previous to that still exists.
Okay.
So if you see the timeline map we've got all those kind of forks, and you see the Sinister timelines where you've got the Moira clones ending them. It's like this timeline ended 10 years in the future, but they still exist in the same way that all moments of time exist in an eternalist universe. I believe that's it's called. That's an animal word, I think. As in it ends there, but all points previous to that existed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think it's kind of fascinating, and in many ways, that does make Moira McTaggart, in some way, the most powerful mutant on the planet, because her death does reset an entire universe and destroys what ended.
Especially because it's not just like destroys is a strong word, because it's like when you've got to that level of power, like destroys is different. Ending is a different thing from destroying in a cosmic sense.
Okay.
You know what I mean? This is what I agree with you. I think unpacking the actual semiotics of it is interesting, because on one level it's like, if you're talking in the law, in physics, and a much more existential sort of view with it, oh no, it's just ending. This is the nature, because this is the nature of time, and eternalism means that there's no free will and things. It's like Doctor Manhattan. But if you actually take it from what I think our perspective is, oh no, she's destroyed a universe. She's absolutely destroyed it. Yeah, like she's enormous. Like it's an enormously powerful, because even like the alternative way that you might take the reading from Powers of X is she destroys the time and then it restarts. So like the actual all that past time is dead. So in some ways, like we've made it, the way we've gone with it is the less destructive one, as in she doesn't destroy the past, she destroys she ends it. Anyway, yeah, it's a Moira's a hell of an idea that John and his team brought to the table.
Now, when we talk about the ending or destroying of the timeline from her death, is it choice that it happens? Like, if she dies but things are going well, if everyone found a way of perfect happiness and Moira McTaggart dies in that timeline, would it automatically reset again, or is she choosing when she dies that this will now reset? Like, how much?
She's used it in all.
Go ahead.
I mean, in the actual story, she's used it in all different kind of ways. Like normally, it's like, oh my okay, it's it's late in the day for me, so I can't think any time that no, Moira chose to end it in life. Was it 9? The one with no, it's life 6. I'm doing a squinty face because I'm not sure. It's the one where basically the Dominion was about to eat everybody, and the people and the AIs clearly believed that if she died, the timeline would end. And that's the when Wolverine stabs her and therefore ends the universe. So like about her first life, she died of old age, and that still ends the universe. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And that's interesting, is it? Like, so it's almost like Marvel Universe would never, as long as Moira existed, that Marvel Universe would never move on from 70 years or whatever from her birth if she was left to natural devices.
Right.
So yeah, apparently, but of course, then Mr. Sinister has cloned Moira and used her as a time travel device, basically, because Mr. Sinister's a right bastard, and he's not, so yes, it's a really ridiculously powerful mutant gift.
So,
but also useless. You know what I mean? Like it's a limit to what you can do with it as well. So apart from like using it as a bomb, really.
I mean, is there why? I mean, obviously there's a Terminator aspect to what's going on in the series because Xavier and his team is going to go back in time and try to kill the younger more, at least what comes off us. Are they better off just sticking her in like a stasis for eternity? Because my God, things don't stop as long as she's alive forever.
There's like one thing we've only had 3 pages about the ending, so like I think a lot of people go, what about this and what about that? And like 100%. Yes, we haven't given you answers yet, and that's kind of issue 2. You can imagine like the rest of the team will be introduced, and there's a big argument about, will this work? You know what I mean? Like, and the specifics and how it works. What we do know is like Moira's gift only activates when she's 13. So if you kill Moira before she turns 13, the universe won't resurrect. I think, as you say, the stasis chamber, that's something someone could do, but they can let them out the stasis chamber. It's big risk, like all these kind of, and I can't really say any more than that. You know what I mean? Like what you're saying is right, but the one fact that John did establish way back in the start of all this was her power clicked in 13, and if she died, and this is what I mean by like, I presume John would have used that something, because you don't say that unless you plan to use it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's how writing works in this kind of, you set things up and then you go and rip it off 3 years down the line.
Right, because anyone who knows about Moira McTaggart's power, there really is no point in thinking long term. I mean, within 70 years or so, things are going to reset anyway. There's no point in thinking beyond where are we going to be in 100 years. You're not going to get that far.
But like but Moira definitely, in fact, she's had different timeline. She's given herself like the plus 1,000 timeline. It's. In fact, immortality is an impossible. In fact, literally, my book's called Immortal Xmen. The fact that that's 100% in the War from Weft. There's words I can't say. It's 100% part of the concept. Like, oh yeah, Moira definitely needs to stay alive, otherwise we're all messed up. Or you depower her, as of course to take Mystique and Destiny's approach to the problem.
Well, the other thing that's kind of interesting is that Xavier's going to go back in time to an earlier time in history with earlier superheroes. Will they view what Xavier's trying to do as heroic or villainous? Because it's kind of like the idea of killing baby Hitler at some level. I mean, it's like, yeah, but it's a baby. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
how do
I,
the past selves feel about what he's trying to accomplish right now?
I was like, even how the present people feel about it. Like, it's
Oh,
can you
yes.
imagine? Can you imagine like Cyclops is like hears about this plan? He's going to go, "You doing, what, Xavier? This
Right.
is shady even for you, dude." Yeah, I must admit, this is like I try to not read much of the internet commentary, just because I need to get my brain on the on the ball. But but I just feel like a lot of the responses, oh no, they can't reboot Krakoa and that level, but no one's gone. What's that? Xavier can't kill a 13. Everyone just doesn't respond to Xavier killing a 13-year-old. Oh yeah, that sounds the sort of thing he would do. And everyone, no, you can't kill Krakoa. Like that makes me smile. It's like how poor Xavier. But yeah, it's a really grim plot. People back then would feel bad about it. People now feel about it. And I think that's one reason why it's interesting. Like
Hmm.
he says it's his plan. Can he do it? We'll find out.
I think another interesting that you built up, especially through Immortal X-Men, it seemed like there's a serious rivalry, if I'm saying the word speech. Anyways, between magic, AI, and mutants. Why are they natural adversaries of each other? Is there a because of these is a certain goal they're all trying to reach to that always would pit them against each other from the rest of humanity?
It's tricky. Like I think power is complicated. Like
Hmm.
this is weirdly a theme in the next book I'm doing. And that they talk about comics being a power fantasy, and it's like no, all power fantasies. The second you've got multiple powerful people, your power is limited by everyone else around you. Like a power fantasy is, I mean? Like I don't think there's any natural conflict between mutants and magic, and I think the whole theme of mutant magic that Teeny explored, especially, and actually Teeny and Al really explored in their books. It was great. But I just think power tends to rub up against each other. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? I think that's and like you can, and it's been a theme in my book, but it's been more of a theme just because of I guess it's been the real politic of it. Like that kind of like when Selena arrived in issue 1 and she gave this pitch about why she should be on the thing. Like a lot of people say, oh no, that's a really good idea, and she's right. Her argument is really good. That the Quiet Council doesn't have enough magicians on. Um, of course, it's the problem is, and Celine should not be anywhere near the Quiet Council. So Celine is not, she is a classic bad guy in that she's a fundamentally selfish monster, and atrophied sense of empathy for anyone else who is alive. They shouldn't be in charge. Call me
Right.
an idealist. Uh, um, but like, what I'm interested in is like the reality of the situation, even if it's fantastical. Like, I tend to go like, okay, what would happen, or why doesn't that happen? And like at least part of this was in Judgment Day. Like when I was asked to do an Eternals X-Men War, I was like, okay, how does that work then? And like if you've got and it became what Judgment Day became, as in like the Eternals have to do a nuclear first strike. Otherwise, what's the point? Because you can't, if everyone's got nuclear weapons, your only option is first strike. And
Hmm.
it's got to be, you know what I mean? Like, and that came from the natural story, and that became about cosmic, there's lots of stuff going on there. And for me, it's like, okay, me just looking at Krakoa. Krakoa is weak against magic. Yeah, they've got strong magicians, but they're not in a position of power. Therefore, there is an area of conflict there.
Hmm.
Especially, I think like Teeny did some really good stuff about the idea of what mutant magic meant in terms of like, and I think the stripping away the metaphor. I think Teeny's somebody who really likes the metaphorical aspect of mutantism. It's about the new, the idea. This is, I mean, that's why the Cult Akbar has the idea of old magic. This idea of that the old, especially because the British aristocracy are there, the idea of old magic versus new magic, old thought versus new thought. That's what I think Teeny was going. So I've never talked about Teeny like this, so I don't want to like put words in her mouth. But that and that, what I mean? Like these conflicts interest me. But especially like it became much a bigger theme in my book when I realized I was going to take Mother Righteous and run with her. Because it's like kind of like because when we realized, oh no, with 6, because let's say we had a year in the fall, we might have seen more the actual attempts earlier. We might have seen a stasis attempt or an Orbis attempt at Dominion because we've had the space to tease them.
Hmm.
But when we realized it'd be 6 issues, oh no, we could do it another way because people are still expecting them. And no, let's skip to the end. They've already happened. You haven't, that for me that felt fun. Um, uh, so when I realized which one to grab, oh no, I'm going to grab Mother Righteous because that allows me to do the end game I want to do. Like the fact she is the magic, she's the one who has been flirting around. She's the one who would most tie most of the White Hot Room, and I always want to do a White Hot Room story. At least after a certain point, I want to do a White Hot Room story. but quite early because I've got Exodus teasing it in issue like 5, so it is early.
Well, like I said, it was interesting what was going on with Jean Grey, especially having read the Jean Grey series with Louise Simonson, and where you're heading that direction. I mean, that's Jean Grey is a very dangerous entity to be trying to control like that. I mean, how wise is what the Righteous is doing at this moment?
Like honestly, like one of my things, like I tend to write quite smug, over planning villains. I've got quite a lot of them, like Sinister and Unit and Mother Righteous and various other people. But at least and it goes really well for them until it doesn't. And like so well, Sinister got Sinister, and then he spent like 1,000 years being shat on, and then he came back to Earth, and then he was thrown in the pit and shat on some more, and then he's like spent his time hiding in Xavier's brain, and like, I mean, he's a slightly better, and he's like, all that stuff's happened. And Mother Righteous got really high, and then she's got her legs kicked beneath her, and now she's in for a very bad time for some period of times. You know what I mean? Like you put like no, like trying to take over the Phoenix. It went pretty well for her, except she got jumped. You know what I mean? Like Mother Righteous is a very bad time ahead of her in that way. But like the Phoenix stuff is really interesting, and I think we've got a really interesting Phoenix story to say during the end of this period. Like it was like there's stuff we talked about in the room, and there's like one idea like when we actually happen, I'll give Al all the credit for it because Al had the very specific idea, and I think it's brilliant. But it's good. It's like the good thing about one of those ideas where the mutant circuits is in KCOA Age. These mutants whose powers come together and do something bigger than them. That's what for me what the KCOA X-Men office is. There's the whole kind of mutant circuit aspect to what we do, and that so much stuff has emerged from the collaboration. That's magical, and it feels like a once in a lifetime experience to work for hire. Look at me be sappy.
So can you give some hints of where we're going in the Rise of the Power of X series?
It's so annoying because but the interviews I did beforehand, obviously everyone asked me about like the Kamala and all the team, and I could talk a little bit. But of course, I know that's not the story. The story is really Xavier and what's going on there. But sometimes I can't really hype it properly. And now I'm in the position where, oh no, the story is Xavier, but I don't really want to say much because like what is there to, because that is the point of reading. Me and Jerry start dovetailing more. We reveal the other two members of the team in issue 2. Issue 2 is so much about what's been going on. I'll say going forward, the fact that I think issue 2, people go, well, how the hell has Xavier got here? There's going to be a load of questions. All the answers will be in X-Men Forever as well. Because X-Men Forever is kind of like the backstory of how Xavier got his team together. And it's about other stuff as well. So that's the other aspect. So an X-Men Forever becomes this weird ballooning plot. Like issue 4 and 3 issues of it happen between issues 4 and 5 of Powers. And it's basically a ballooning subplot. And it's like, that sounds like diminishing, but no, it's a really important thing, and like happens between these 2 issues in a powerful way. And that's part of the joy of writing these books, is that you think structurally, like, no, I want to be able to read Powers of X, and it will work perfectly if you don't read anything else. But if you want to read it all, we'll give you so much more extra stuff. What else do I want to say? And it kind of links back to what I said earlier, as in like I tried to bring it back to the people. Like this whole thing started with like Xavier and Moira on a bench, and in some ways, getting back to those people and everything that's happened between now and then. That's what I want, because like, yes, this story is very complicated. It's about time and space and multiple dimensions and hiding from like alien space gods between dimensions. But it's really about 2 people, not 2 people. It's about a lot of people with their hopes for the future and their fears for the present and all those kind of stuff. And it's got to be about that as well. And I really hope by the end of it, we land the real emotional side of it. You know what I mean? Like, that's why, because I tear up. Like you said earlier, what stories have to do. If I get emotional over something when I'm thinking about it or writing it, for me, that's a good sign. If an idea is upsetting, and I mean that in every single way, I'm probably going to write it. And I'm the first audience. As a night book, I probably cried over everything anyone's cried over in any of my books. And I think there's some really poetic stuff we have at the end, and also some amazing fight scenes. It's superhero comics. It's got it all.
Well, Mr. Gill, it's been an absolute honor to speak with you, sir. And when you're doing your next project, please come right back.
I will do. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much. It was a total pleasure. Have a good day or a good night.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Traverse of the Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to return for another exciting episode when Andy Lanning and Anthony Williams boards the mothership.